In firefighting and public safety, reliability is key. For over 20 years, the Fire Store has equipped first responders with trusted gear featuring brands like MSA Carnes for helmets and Seek for thermal imaging cameras. Stay prepared. Visit thefirestore.com today. The Fire Store, your trusted safety partner.
Welcome back to another episode of Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment, the Apparatus Workshop. My name is Nick Wilbur, and joined with me is Slauch, as always. Today, we're going to kind of dive into a new topic. We took a break from the tiller trucks. We're working on some good content with that to be continued soon. So definitely stay tuned for another part to the tiller truck conversation. But we wanted to take a break. We had some recent conversations and kind of thoughts that, I think it's really important, especially in today's purchasing climate and the apparatus industry as a whole. And so we're going to kind of talk about budget billing, best practices versus cost versus requirements versus, safety and what requirements can you sign away and what requirements can you not sign away, and kind of how that all is determined. So we're going to kind of dive into this. Maybe I don't have, $2 million in the bank to build an engine. And maybe that's a little bit over, but, we're kind of headed in that direction now. So, maybe I don't have over $1 million for an engine company. So how do I kind of get an engine company and get the most bang for my buck? And I think it's a difficult conversation. And so, I'll kind of kick that over to Win, and, what are requirements that we have to look at, and why can you kind of sign some requirements away and some you can't? And what does that kind of look like if you go to pre-engineering or a final inspection, and what does that kind of mean when you sign that stuff away?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you brought two things up there. Is that safety should probably be the number one thing that we're trying to build this for, followed by what we always push is the reliability and trying to make this thing long lasting. So at the end of the day, I think when you look at it, is what does safety cost, and what are you willing to give up to, kind of get to that in your price range. I mean, obviously, that's kind of the big thing here. So, requirement wise about what you can and cannot have or do on the fire truck, and what the manufacturers are willing to not do are going to vary. It's going to depend. I had a company the other day ask, "Hey, can we disable the seatbelts?" Absolutely not. There's not one fire company or one manufacturer out there who's going to allow you to sign off on the seatbelt alarm being disabled. That's one of those safety things that isn't going to happen. Hey, can we increase the speed from 60 to 68, in our tanker? That's a sign off that you can get done. One of the past sign offs safety wise that they would allow you to do was the chevrons on the back. NFPA picked, 3 or 4 different colors, standard colors, that were, not, I wouldn't say they were standard based on the standards, but they were picked for a reason, that they were most visible, at night. And those are the reasons that they picked them. But they also allowed you to sign off on those colors. So if you wanted blue and white or, green and black, they would allow you to do that. So those are things that you can sign off on. And again, that stuff is going to vary based on the manufacturers to what they feel confident with or comfortable with, allowing you to say, okay, I will take, this responsibility versus, you not taking them or you not taking the responsibility to sign that stuff off.
Yeah, I think too with that, the sign-offs and just what manufacturers are willing to do and not. We've kind of heard that we go to a field evaluation or a fleet inspection, and we look at this rig, and you're like, how did this get built? And you start kind of asking questions, and like, well, we went to these 3 other manufacturers, and they said they wouldn't build it, but the 4th one would. And, that to me is the red flag central. Like if you're asking multiple manufacturers to do X, Y, Z, whatever that is, and manufacturers are telling you no, there's two reasons. One, it's probably a safety factor or cost factor, right? Like that kind of goes hand in hand maybe together. And then two, maybe it's time and engineering. They just don't want to do it, right? And so you have to kind of really start, taking a pause and figuring out how much is this worth. I think some of the other, safety things we can do or safety requirements, people that want to sign off on them. I mean, some of those could be good reasons. Like you brought up the seatbelt alarm. I mean, I know there's a lot of issues with seatbelt sensors here or there, and them going off and being faulty and this, that, and the other. So like there might be an okay reason behind that. But again, I think it just goes back to proper inspection and maintenance. Like you gotta get that safety equipment in there and you gotta kind of make sure that you're keeping up on it. Because we found places that don't wear their seatbelts, and they would be the ones that wouldn't want it because it's just annoying when they're not wearing their seatbelt. Again, that's kind of not acceptable there.
And again, that the seatbelt thing, especially, or any alarm that you're concerned with. Oh, we've had issues with this in the past, and we're going to make the cab door ajar. We're going to make that no alarm. We'll have the light flashing, but it won't alarm on us because we've had issues with that in the past. Well, I mean, that's not really an excuse. Do you really want to drive down a road with the potential to have just because you've had issues in the past to have a cab door come open and smack a car or a pedestrian or something like that? Versus if you really dig into your spec, there's probably somewhere in your spec that tells you how to silence those alarms. While it won't silence it permanently, it'll silence the incessant, alarming and give you an alarm every 15 seconds. So, again, there's still an issue that allows you to get back to the firehouse, but it doesn't take that safety issue entirely out. So, hey, we have a bad seatbelt, sensor. We'll silence it. We'll get a beep every 15 seconds. I still know there's an issue, but it's not the annoying alarm, and it allows me to get it fixed, but it still keeps us within, the quality. And it does, again, if you want to put or go aftermarket and put something on, that's more money that you have to pay. So, again, you're talking about budget building. Sometimes it's cheaper just to allow things to be built the way they were designed to be built and not try to over engineer it or anything at the same time.
And I think it goes back to putting the pressure on the manufacturer. If this is a faulty thing, then what can we do and put it back on them? What can we do to make this sensor better? What can we do to enhance the reliability of this sensor? What can we do working with maybe a maintenance shop that they stock those sensors because we've had an issue with them before and they can replace them out sooner? And again, maybe have connections in there where you just have a seat with the sensor built in on hand. And if it starts going awry, you just go down to the shop and in 30 seconds, you spec'd it out so that seat can pop out, new seat pops in, and now we're good to go, right? I think there's a lot of ways to look at that instead of, hey, this thing doesn't work, let's just take it out and just never use it again. Let's try, again, using some of this stuff that's built for us, for our safety, and put that back on the manufacturer to kind of do a better job with that.
Yeah, and a lot of time when you pose those questions to the manufacturers, they sometimes have a fix already in their system that, whether it's, hey, if you request it, we replace this plastic clip with a metal clip and it solves a problem. But, again, if you don't know about that, if you don't know that issue or your salesman doesn't, then that's something. And again, that might be that upcharge, but when you're trying to do any build, it doesn't matter. We want to keep all of our builds as cheap as possible, obviously, especially in today's environment. But, an upcharge now could be better than, if it's a $100 upcharge now to put in a different piece or clip that's going to last 5 times as long, then I don't have the $100 per hour service charge to take a door panel off, that takes me 2 hours to do. Plus now I get charged the $150 for the same part, so now I'm 3 times the cost of this part, plus my apparatus is out of service to fix something that I could have just, spent a little bit more money on for the front end. Right. So even budget building, and I don't want to say budget building. It's not budget building. It's building based on the amount of money and what you can afford. It's trying to build the best fire truck for you with what's available. But, sometimes it's better to look at what happens and pay now versus trying to pay that later, because the costs later are always going to probably be higher when you look at the grand scheme of things. In apparatus out of service time, now we're paying, extra man hours to get stuff apart. If you didn't build something in to make that access easy, again, that increases those man hours and things like that. So sometimes you have to be able to look past the fact that, hey, this part right now is going to add money to the cost of this fire truck, but down the road, it's going to add way, way more. So.
And I think that kind of needs to be communicated back to, maybe some of the politicians or the garters of the money, if you will. And, again, education is what's going to help everybody, between yourself as being on an apparatus committee and, the people that you're dealing with and communicating with that are involved with the money or approval process. I hear, we have this much money for a budget. You go out and by final inspection, you spent that to the cent. That to me is kind of crazy. And I've been a part of committees that do that as well, right? You have X number of dollars, you're going to go through and you're going to spend every single one of those dollars. So is there something that we can do to maybe cut costs to maybe come down off that price? Or like you were saying, do we spend that money now today to make it cheaper over the lifespan of the truck? And we talk about cost of ownership and, the cost over the lifespan of a truck. If 30 years, that, like you said, that $3,000 we spend sounds like a lot when we're going to spec a fire truck. But if that saves you $10,000 or $15,000 over that year, now you have more money you can save up to put into the next fire truck. And now your next fire truck's going to be better. And again, it's that entire budget view. And I think we got kind of locked down on that, what we're speccing the fire truck today. And, you hear somebody and, we talked about this a lot. And if you're listening to this podcast and you don't know a whole lot about Win or myself, if you think that these podcasts are the only time we talk fire trucks, you're wrong. I think my wife and his wife probably know more about fire trucks than they would ever care to know about fire trucks, because we just have casual conversations about them. But we had talked about that before. Like, someone says they don't have a very big budget on a fire truck, and, you see them with the, all chromed out or gold leaf on there or rotorays and Mars lights. And you're starting to look at like, all right, well, they had the money, but what they thought were the necessities or what they thought they needed, they sacrificed some of those safety equipment pieces. And I think, that is one part of the conversation. Then you have the other part of the conversation where you have somebody that really just can't afford anything. And, they have maybe that $5,000 or $10,000 left in the budget. And maybe they're trying to do the nice to have for the members, or they just don't know exactly where that money should be spent. So I think, I think we need to kind of maybe break that down of like, hey, what are some different items that we can look at? And so I wrote a couple of things down that we have recommended and maybe some considerations or thought behind some of them. So we have airbags, reinforcing the bumper, painting the underside of the truck, the seat belts, how they're mounted, what you kind of put into them, and then rollover protection. And some of those items can be pretty expensive. So let's walk through kind of that list and just chat about those items. Like how would a person decide whether that's right for them and wrong? And what if they can't afford it? Are they a bad person?
Yeah. Well, obviously, if you can't afford something, no, you're not a bad person. I think the key is, and Bill Adams in Fire Apparatus and Equipment Journal has an article, and maybe it's Cantankerous Wisdom, one of his online articles, but where he's talking about home-built fire trucks. And there are plenty of home-built fire trucks, running around the fire service. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Obviously, people have all sorts of skills and abilities out to where they can build a body. They can put it on, whatever becomes available to them. The question comes down to is, are you following the safety guidelines that are made? Is it in weight? Is it lit up the way it's supposed to be for NFPA? And again, NFPA's recommendations, you don't have to be exactly there, but when something happens, that's where they're going to come back to. So how close are we to mimicking or matching the NFPA requirements if we're building this thing on our own? if you're doing that because you don't have that money, it doesn't make you a bad person. But again, what does safety cost, and how are you ensuring that your members are going to be safe? If you're, on an F550, our favorite truck, right? If you're going to put a 2,000 gallon water tank on it and run it around, that probably isn't going to meet their weight requirements of that axle and the braking system. So, if that's what you're going to do, you just have to understand what you're doing when you're doing it and where it's going to put you. That's probably something that we want to avoid. I think some of the other stuff you talked about, rollover, there were actually, and before we even get to rollover, there was a couple things that were added to NFPA 1900 and things that were actually taken out. The VDR, the vehicle data recorder, was actually a removed requirement in this new version of NFPA 1900. And when, it first came out and the people who wrote it might say something different, but we were told essentially by those people that it was removed because it's expensive and nobody knows how to use it. Well, if nobody knows how to use it or get the data off of it, whose fault is that? Is it the user, or is it the manufacturer who put it in who didn't train them? So that's the first question, right? So if you're going to look at it from that point of view, then there's a workaround there. Teach the people at the factory or at your final inspection, this is how you get the information off of it. This is what you can do or use. But if you're going to do it and say, all right, well, this is really expensive, there are some other options out there now on being able to track some things, and that's good. But what it comes down to is that a majority of the vendors or manufacturers actually use that vehicle data recorder that is no longer required, but they use it to track their seatbelt monitoring. So now there's still something that they have to put in your fire truck that even if you request that it not be there, they almost have to put it in. So there's a requirement that was meant to come out or could potentially come out to save you money, but still has to stay in there. Some of the other things that were put in that are going to increase the cost of that fire truck are the electronic stability control. That is now a standard that has to be in there. So now you have to have in an NFPA compliant fire truck all of those things that are going to look at the steering wheel, the brakes, the wheel spin, things like that are going to kick things in, whether it's the ABS, traction control, shut off your Jake brake, things like that are all tied together now. So that's an expense that you're not going to be able to get out of. Rollover protection is one of the big things in there. Why rollover protection wasn't necessarily added into the standard, if you're not going to have rollover protection, then you either have to meet the standards of a tilt table test, but then they also added in some mathematical calculations that you can use now too, as an option to save you money. And even in those lower cost builds, or a smaller manufacturer who may not have may not have access to a tilt table, they now can do the calculations and still meet that requirement of the rollover or tilt table testing and things like that to make your apparatus safe. So again, there's some things there. I think some other things that were kind of done in an effort to save money is, the fact that you don't have to have ground ladders. They removed the ground ladder requirement from the standard and put it into the annex, which, they did that. If you can't afford to buy new ground ladders and yours are, and this is where it comes into it, if yours have been tested and have passed the test within the year that you're purchasing the fire truck or getting the fire truck, then you can take your ladders and move them over to your new fire truck. So, that's a key. There's some things there that could end up costing you money because you're trying to save it. If you told the manufacturer the wrong ground ladder size or the wrong brand, then the ground ladders that you're trying to move may not fit, which is going to cost you a whole bunch of money on the back end. But, again, if you planned it all out and, that's what you want to do, then that's fine. You can do that.
I think it's important too with that, and we talked about it, and you mentioned the education piece. We brought this up in one of our earlier podcasts. It was probably one of the first podcasts we did with the ground ladder selection. Who's training them on to do, how to do your needs assessment for your ground ladders, and there's no training out there. We put the onus on the fire department with no training behind it. The other part of that is, now are you messing up your current ladder truck spec because you're trying to fit your old ground ladders in there? you go from a single axle to a tandem axle quint type apparatus. Well, now we get away from that 3-section to a 2-section 35. But hey, we already had a 3-section, so now we're gonna just keep the 3-section on there. So I think there's a lot of conversations behind that, and you're right. I mean, is that worth the money that you're saving to do that? Right now, you're taking up more room in your ladder tunnel. It could possibly be a heavier ladder depending on the model and the manufacturer of it, and maybe cost more energy on the fire ground, and operationally that could hurt you by transferring that ladder over. So yeah, I mean, it's a huge web of thought process, and I think the biggest thing behind it is knowledge, right? Even if the manufacturer says they don't want to do something, or that they're going to do it a certain way, just like the VDR, like, understand why it's in there, understand what's behind it, so that, hey, all right, well, it's our VDR's already in there. Let's get the connection. Let's make sure that it's available. Let's make sure we get the training. Let's push that to the manufacturer. Hey, this thing's already in there. Let's get the training and understanding on it, because this could be a tool for us. Right. So, yeah, I agree.
Well, and I think you threw something out there. Is you talk about operations and the weight of equipment, and again, it comes back to is what does safety cost, and the safety cost, to do that, the safety cost upgrading your ground ladders to one that's 75 pounds lighter, one that is new and has been tested. And again, don't by no means take the fact that it's coming to be brand new as that has been tested. I mean, that's something that should be done. You should require a test in your spec, that these ground ladders have to be tested prior to me accepting delivery of them. But, don't just take that. The ground ladders are ordered months, if not years in advance, and sit somewhere at a factory. It takes 15 months right now to get a ground ladder. So, you're ordering them way out. So don't just take, that for gospel. But again, if, the overall cost of safety is not just the cost of the apparatus, right? Same thing. You talk about there's step height requirement, right? 24 inches for the first step. Well, if you did something where you put an independent front suspension, you put an independent rear suspension, those things are going to increase the height of the fire truck. If you did 4-wheel drive on either a commercial or custom fire truck, that's going to increase that height. That's going to now add more parts and pieces to meet, now we have to meet that 24-inch requirement. So now you have to have a step. Well, does that step, that costs more money? It also puts, now am I going to hit the step when I come off the hose bed while I'm trying to pull hose now, or is that going to cause my knee injury? Is my ankle going to get twisted, again, coming out of the cab because I'm 28 inches, even though I have an extra step, and am I going to come out of the cab backwards and hit that step, or how is that going to work? So again,
I'm not going to use that step. Yeah. I mean, we've seen that a little bit where we have to add that step in for that step height, but it's not ergonomic to use. It's not there. And so you're just battling that 28 inches anyway. And so it's like, all right, well, like you said, we made this 4x4, this other useful engine. Now it's actually more unsafe because we're trying to meet the NFPA requirement. And
right.
I think the NFPA requirement is there for a reason, but how do we overcome that?
Right. And when you talk about budget building, why did you do that? Why did you put an independent front suspension on? Did you do your research? Do the roads that you drive on require an independent front suspension? Or are they relatively well taken care of? Again, it's difficult to say, but if the roads are well taken care of, is the extra couple $10,000 worth the independent front suspension? Or is that money better spent somewhere else, on your fire truck? And again, does it bring the height down to where I don't need that extra step, where I don't have that extra injury, things like that. So there's lots of things when you look at it that things that you do that if you don't plan out the whole, every step of it and how it's going to affect a truck all the way through, again, now we're adding money, we're costing money, things like that. Whereas if we said, hey, what are the alternatives to an independent front suspension? Is there another suspension out there that does something similar, provides the same ride quality that I can go and save some money on? Again, there's some things like that.
I think with that too, like you said, put it back on that manufacturer to ask the questions and get the knowledge. I was talking to somebody not that long ago, and they were asking about how they should gear their fire truck. And I know we've talked about this a bunch. Like, we've gone and trying to educate ourselves and understand it. And at the end of the day, that's a performance standard, right? Like, you could have a 450 horsepower motor and be just fine in your area, or you might need a 600 horsepower engine, right? Who knows the answer to that? Probably an engineer behind a computer that's doing the calculations and kind of figuring it out.
Exactly. And just because, when you were building dump trucks, or, when you were a farmer building dump trucks or running, a 1970 Mac, that everything's different now. And just because you needed the largest motor in that Mac in 79 to haul the load doesn't mean that in today's fire trucks, you need to put that big motor in. That big motor that's going to cost you, 10 to 40,000 extra dollars in just the motor itself, not to mention the space in the cab that it's going to eat up, the fuel, the weight that it's going to add to it, it's going to add all that. So just because you say, oh, well, we had a 550 horsepower motor in our last fire truck, we need that. Well, maybe you don't. Maybe the 450 with a different torque rating or a different, like you said, gearing system works. Talk with the people, whether it's the FDIC or, any of the shows, go anywhere, talk with the chat or the engine engineer at your manufacturer. Talk with what can we put together here to make this work? Does a Cummins and a, Cummins, obviously I'm going to say, we try not to say brand name, but in fire truck world, Cummins is one of the few motors or only motor that most manufacturers can use. But does the Cummins motor work better with brand A transmission or brand B transmission, right? If I switched one of those out, can I save money by going with a smaller motor? Again, and if you go with a smaller motor, you go with a smaller transmission. So now we're backing costs down over not only the build, but over that cost in that course of the life of the fire truck too. So, when you're trying to build something, it's very important to put the right components on your fire truck that fit your territory and what you need. We just had a conversation at the firehouse this morning about speed. And somebody picked a fire truck up at the manufacturer and drove it back. And it was governed at 60 miles an hour. And they said, hey, if you sign this waiver, we can run it up to 72. So, of course, he signed a waiver because he's driving it back from the manufacturer from Wisconsin to Pennsylvania. So who wants to drive 60 miles an hour? But the first thing they're going to do when they get it back here and put it into service is turn the speed back down. Because we had those conversations. There's no reason to go that fast in the area that I live. You can't get that fast on the roads. And if you can, it's unsafe. So again, while that's something you can sign off on, is it worth it? Is it safe to do it? And, again, back to the component issue. Do I really need those components to operate in the environment that I'm in?
Right. If you're not looking at the gearing and your gearing allows you to go 72 miles an hour, that's probably a bad thing anyway. Like, if I'm responding up and down the road, I have a bunch of stop signs and red lights. And, back in the day, they did a study in the FDNY, a 6-cylinder versus 4-cylinder motor. The 6-cylinder won out, and they were actually safer operating that because the front end speed, they were stopping at stoplights, stopping at stop signs. And they had the pickup to actually come to a complete stop and not slow their response time down because of that acceleration in the beginning. Well, I don't think that fire truck can probably go 70 miles an hour because it's geared at the lower end to be able to take off. Again, not a motor expert here. I'm sure someone at home is probably shaking their head right now, and that's okay. But again, that's not our line of responsibility. Our line of responsibility is to have the manufacturer understand what our territory is like and build us a fire truck to meet that. And we talked about it with the domino effect, right? You now have this bigger motor. Now you need a bigger transmission. Now you've added weight to the front. Now there's less space. Now you might need a bigger cab to fit the people you want in the back. Now you have a bigger axle, bigger tires, bigger rims, bigger suspension, bigger shocks, right? Everything just became bigger. Now all of that money together is now taking from the budget, where we take that decision back and we go down to that lower motor. Now airbags become a conversation, right? Now airbags come back in, rollover protection comes back in, Painting the underside comes back in, right? We have these safety items and these preventative maintenance items. They're not the sexy items that we like to talk about, but I think that, they're missed on so many fleets. I saw, there's a lot of news and stuff from major cities out there, and some of the pictures and videos that are surfacing of what those fleets look like. And you look at these major fleets and the underside and just the sides of the vehicle just rotting away at 30, 35 years of life. That's crazy to me. And in an everyday fire truck, do we need the same level of protection that we do in a major city? Maybe not, right? So maybe that underside painting might not be the good to go, but what else can we do then to maybe protect the underside, right? Do we then add in our yearly maintenance? We add in a steam cleaning, right? Steam cleaning in-house, buy a couple of Tyvek suits and put the new guy underneath to go and steam clean the underside of the fire truck. That's not going to cost you $4,000 when you buy the fire truck, to paint it. But now you've added that layer of protection in there. We're cleaning that out and maybe doing a thorough inspection and taking care of problems right at the source right away. Now we're still kind of doing our due diligence, but we're not spending that same level of money.
Right. I think it comes back to something we said early on. If you can't afford something, does it make you a bad person because you can't? No, obviously if you hire us and I come talk to you, there are things that I'm going to recommend that cost money. It just is what it is. But again, it's that cost up front versus the cost in the back. I have in the past, and I've everything I offer, if I kind of have an idea of what that price is going to cost, I try to throw it out. I say, hey, listen, this is a really good, I think it's a really good, this manufacturer doesn't build like this manufacturer does. So with manufacturer B, you don't need to do this, but with manufacturer A, this is something that you need to do. And this is a, $5,000 option. Is that safety factor worth it to you? And again, maybe it's not. Are there other options? Can you talk with the dealer? Hey, do you have a body shop that can do the same work for me cheaper? Yeah, we do. Okay. Does that work void any of the main manufacturer's warranty? No, it doesn't, because it's done in a body shop that's qualified by this manufacturer. Okay. So there's an option. I just saved half the cost of that because somebody else can do the same work for a little bit cheaper after the fact. You talk about painting the undersides. Again, that's something that the painting the undersides is a protection issue by far, but it's also an inspection issue. How it's so much easier to get under there and see stuff that's wrong with your fire truck when it is not black and it's not covered in dirt. But again, going back to that, does it make you a bad person if you can't afford it? Absolutely not. But what it does require you to do is to, like you said, increase the vigilance. God, that's twice today I said that word wrong. The vigilance of your inspections, right? Maybe, I got to do a yearly inspection, but I also now I need to clean this thing. I need to make sure that after the wintertime, or maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the wintertime, we get underneath of it. We build a homemade, chassis washer that I can drive over. I hook up a hose to either my pumper or an in-house hydrant, and I can drive over and rinse the salt off of it, rinse the brine, rinse all that beet juice and bad stuff off of it. I can inspect it at the same time. And then we do that annual, rust treatment that we can do ourselves. Sure, it's nicer to have somebody else do it, but it's something that I can do myself too, if necessary. So, again, it just increases those things that you have to do. So, we like to add, one of the things I like to add is that the parking brake or the windshield wipers are tied to the parking brake. Well, I mean, that can be, when you get the prices back, can be a fairly expensive option. So, when you take that option and then you look and say, all right, well, it's $80 a windshield wiper. I have 2 or 3 of them that I need to replace when they burn up because, it was raining when we went to the fire 5 hours ago, and it stopped raining 2 minutes after we got here, and the windshield wipers have been going full speed on the window for 5 hours. Is it worth it when you average that out over the course or the lifetime you expect to keep that fire truck? Is whatever, it cost up front worth it in the, in the long run? Or is, if I got to replace windshield wipers 8 times throughout the course of this thing, because I burn them up versus just average use, is it worth it? And it's looking at that big picture, and it comes back to, again, it's that pay now versus pay later thing.
I think the big thing that that was very impressionable to me too, just starting out the fire truck, fleet evaluation and fire truck evaluation part of this, obviously, shadowing my dad, he had, a statement. We went to this one place and fire trucks were pretty dirty, decent amount of money in there. And, they were kind of crying how they were poor and how they needed new fire trucks because their fire trucks were falling apart. And, we go back to the hotel after the first night and he looked at me and he goes, "Soap is free." He's like, a brush and some soap and some water is free. And, obviously there is some cost to that, right? But the fire trucks just weren't maintained well. They weren't, in tip top shape. They knew we were coming. They invited us in. Those were the dates we set. It wasn't like it was a snowstorm or rainstorm that day. Like, you feel like you would have them kind of washing the fleet and standing tall. And, big things we see all the time is dirt and intrusion in the compartments. Just the equipment's dirty. The tools are dirty. And some of the cleanest, most standing tall firehouses and fire trucks we've been into have probably had the least amount of money. I've kind of seen a trend, and obviously it goes back and forth. There's some that have money that do take care of their fire trucks as well. That's not like an overarching statement, but there's poor firehouses out there that I would ride their fire truck tomorrow, even though it might be 30 years old, because, it's absolutely pristine. They take great care of it. They're out there washing, maintaining the equipment and stuff like that. So I think, like you said, there's a lot to be said at, if you're doing your maintenance, you're going out there and you have good training, right? The windshield wiper thing could just be a training issue. Do I just train my people that every time they get on the scene of a call, they turn the windshield wiper off? Does that save the money? And is that something that I'm going to take seriously? Hey, listen, we only have so much money for windshield wipers. You got to turn it off. Hey, when we run XYZ call, you're going to turn the fire truck off instead of keeping it running because we got to save fuel. Like, what other options are there to kind of, instead of speccing something out, maybe have a training conversation or some other way? And it's call volume too, right? If you're only going out and, it rains 20 times a year and you're only running 100 calls, the amount of times that might happen are probably few and far between. But you go to somebody like us in Arlington, that's like a, weekly occurrence where someone's leaving them on, and we're running long duration EMS calls or working incidents or, structure fire calls that now we're away from that fire truck and those windshield wipers are just getting it. Right. And so, I think that's all considered. Yeah.
Yeah. And what it comes down to is wants versus needs. And, again, best practices versus requirements, again, like, is it required to paint the underside of your fire truck? No, but it's a best practice. Is it necessary to have, lighted handrails? No, but it's a want versus a need. You have to have a handrail, but does it need to be lit? Absolutely not. So, again, when you're looking at that, are you spending money on a lit handrail because it looks cool or because you have the money and the availability to do it? And, it comes back, it was taught to me by your dad years and years ago, and other people use it. I don't know who brought it up, or thought of it, but you start an apparatus committee and you say, okay, we have all the money in the world. What do you want on this fire truck? And you write down the 10 things, and then, you put them together and you work from that list. And then you say, okay, we don't have all the money in the world. We have this much money. What are the things that we need to have on this fire truck? And they're two different lists, right? You have to work off the needs first. And then if at the end you have some money left over and it's earmarked for the truck and not necessarily needs to go back into something else, and then we can start to pick from the wants list. All right, well, yeah, the lighted handrails would be nice. Extra perimeter lights, more than the NFPA standard, would be even better, right? Because now I'm going to have more ground light. It's going to be safer for me. Things like that, right? And then we can start to pick and choose from it. Same thing when you're doing, and again, I don't want to say budget build, but you're building. Let's say we're building a pumper tanker or a tanker. Do I need dump valves on it? Yes. Well, how often do you dump? Well, we dump all the time. Okay. Well, then maybe we want to look at dump valves on all three sides. Well, we can't afford dump valves on all three sides. Okay. no big deal. We'll put a dump valve on the back and we'll get a swivel chute or some sort of attachable chute that we can put on, right? But then you go and you look in that a little bit deeper. Oh, well, what material are you going to build a chute out of? Well, we can build it out of mild steel, and it's going to be $3,000 cheaper. Or we can build it out of stainless steel, and it's going to last the life of the fire truck with water, water sitting there and, being exposed, and it's not going to rust, and it's going to cost us $3,000 here. What, is that a need, a requirement, or a best practice that is probably worth spending that $3,000 on, right? So, things to look at. What did I build the dump valve out of? Is it built out of stainless? Is it aluminum? Is it just a mild steel? Again, what am I putting component-wise on this fire truck that makes it work? So, if I save money because I'm just going with a single dump valve off the back of the fire truck, but I build it out of something that's going to rust out in 5 years, am I truly saving money? Or should I save the money, but also spend a little bit of money at the same time, right? So you can, again, budget building can get you in, and I almost say budget. I hate saying budget building because it sounds like you're doing it cheaply. You're doing it, again, with the amount of money that you have available. But sometimes you have to pick and choose, again, those needs versus the wants, and get what you really need in the right spots while you're building that. And then, move on. And it might require you to go request a little bit more money. Hey, we need a little bit more money to put this type of valve on it. This is why. This is what it's going to do. This is the benefit. And this is the likely cost savings over the course of this fire truck. And there's a good chance that your town manager or, city can find that little bit of extra money to do that. Now, if you go and say, hey, listen, we really want this rotary because it's pretty cool when it goes spinny, they're probably not going to give you the money for that, understandably. So
I think it goes back to, like you said before, of like leveraging what people have in the area, and then also needs versus wants. And I think it's also even farther than that. Like what can be done now versus what can be done later. And we've run into this with some overweight fire trucks when we do our weights. We bought this engine. We knew we wanted to put a light tower on the roof. But we didn't have the money, so we did it 2 years later, right? We saw that. I've seen that a couple of times. I know we were standing next to each other when we saw it for one of the inspections as well. And, that's a big thing. Well, did you tell the manufacturer? Well, no. Well, again, it goes back to that domino effect. Well, if you're going to put that light tower on the roof now they have to be able to understand what kind of model you're going to deal with, the weight that it's going to have, and they needed to upgrade their axle. So although they were trying to save money by doing it later down the road, which again, it could be a great, thing to rely on. Like, hey, in 2 or 3 years, we're going to build our budget back up, and we're going to get this want, or this might even be a necessity, but we know we can do it later. We're going to keep this fire truck for 30 years. If for 28 of them we have this thing, it's better than not. If that makes sense. And I think that's great, but we also need to have those conversations earlier. What do you plan on doing later, and what needs to be done to the fire truck to be engineered or thought about appropriately? And then the flip side of that, what can be done later and what can't be, right? Painting the underside of the fire truck, you can't necessarily do that later, right? That's going to cost you way more money than when you build that fire truck. So if there's something that you want, maybe let's say the electric deck gun, this fancy model deck gun, right? That's like the bee's knees, and you can't go without it. Well, is that something that maybe we can spec in later and do the painted frame rails and paint the underside of the fire truck now, and then budget for 2 years from now, we get that fancy deck gun, right? Or do we buy this fancy deck gun with this engine, knowing we're going to flip the fleet, and then it just goes with the next engine, and we have this standard nozzle engine that we send down the road with the used engine when we sell it out of the fleet. Again, there's a lot of things that we can leverage to kind of use those costs to our advantage. I mean, we went somewhere where they had a foam system piped but not put in, and they had the intention of putting the foam system in later. Well, guess what? The money never came around, and they never put the foam system in. That's fine. That's okay, right? Like, you're spending a couple of dollars here and kind of tempering your expectations of what you might get in the future here, and maybe that's a need, and maybe the first two changes and you don't need it anymore. Well, that's great too, right? So again, I think there's a lot of things that we can do in that spec, and at the end of the day, it all comes back down to knowledge. And I learned that with our ladder truck at College Park. Hey, how much is it going to cost for a pre-pipe waterway? And you start getting those numbers and figures, Now we're making decisions from a place of knowledge. We're not just making a decision that we need to have it, we want to have it. We got the call data, we got the number of times it went out of service for that particular issue, we got the cost to put it on the rig versus not, and then we looked at the training that it would take to put it on the rig versus not. And all of those things now, we take that whole group and now we're making an informed decision. And I think at the end of the day, that's all we've ever asked for of apparatus committees, or all we've ever helped apparatus committees do, is add that knowledge power, knowledge is power thing to that decision-making process. And that can save money, right? It can cost money, like you said, but and in that costing money, it's going to save either lives in the safety aspect with airbags or something like that, like rollover protection and seatbelts, or it can save the vehicle with painting the underside of the fire truck, or just using different grade materials. And I think that's kind of that important part of that, is there's a lot of different aspects of that cost that we need to consider. And really, at the end of the day, it comes down to knowledge, really understanding, at a 400 option item list for a fire truck, you have to honestly have that discussion about almost every single one. And it goes back to our conversations about pre-engineering conferences and how people are knocking them out in 6 hours. Now you kind of get where we're coming from, where that's not really a thing, even on a repeat fire truck, because what's changed in the last 10 years or 12 years or 20 years since you built a fire truck? You got to understand each one of those options. What has changed in your first due? What's changed as a requirement for NFPA? What's changed as best practice? We've learned things that we didn't know 20 years ago that now the manufacturers, consultants, or just fleets are doing in general to help better their fleets. And, there's a lot there. There's a lot there to know and understand.
Yeah. And, I think after that long diatribe, I picked up a couple things in there. No, but going back to like the axle thing, and this is key, is I do think when you are trying to build with a budget in mind, whether, again, you're looking for lowest cost, or you have to bid because that's what your municipality says, is that you have to compare bids. The lowest cost bid is low for a reason. You have to figure out why. Is the axle that they put on it, are you maxed out on your weight right away? Because they're trying to save you $3 or $4 grand instead of going from a 22.8 to a 24, where, you have absolutely no room to grow into your fire truck on that smaller axle. But if they bump you up like brand A did or brand B did, then, that there's some growth there. So that weight analysis becomes important, right? But also looking at what this manufacturer is giving me versus this manufacturer, and why is this cost different and this cost different. And again, if you have 3 bids and 2 of them are in one axle, but the cheapest one is in this axle, you really have to ask that question. Same thing is when you do grade and quality of the material that they're using. What is the size of the aluminum? Is it quarter? Is it eighth? What type of stainless steel are they using? Things like that. Why, again, there's a reason that fire trucks cost less money. Some of it is simply that the engineering is just not as detailed or entailed. Not that it's bad engineering. It just doesn't go into it, as much as, a larger manufacturer might have the ability to do. Again, you might just have to ask more questions. Can we do this? Well, I don't know. We have to go talk about it. Whereas this guy over here says, oh yeah, we can do that. That's no problem. This guy just might not have ever done it before. So again, it doesn't mean that everything's bad, but there are reasons somewhere in there that fire truck is less expensive. So it's you as the bidder, it's your responsibility to figure that out and make sure, again, that you are making the right decisions to fit your budget, and not just doing it because this is cheap. It's this for a reason. Let's figure out why. And it might be that is what you need. It's what works for you. It fits. It allows your room to grow. And these people over here just, increased it because they thought they might get one by you. Who knows? But again, it's your responsibility to look through that. And again, make sure that you're making those decisions based on, your knowledge and abilities and what's right for your fire company. and not just because somebody else did it. And what, again, fits in your budget.
I think, first of all, I agree with everything you're saying. And yes, I was on my soapbox a little bit there, so I do apologize. But I think at the end of the day, innovation costs money. And, and that's upfront money, and that's in the back end money too, right? If you're the first one to do whatever, it's going to cost you money, because they're going to do engineering. They're going to do all these things to work out your ideas to make sure it's safe. And then on the back end, it might be a different piece or component that's never been used before. Now you're the test subject of it. So I think that's important. So as you start asking for these special things, you just have to understand that it's going to cost money upfront and possibly in the back end as well. And so if we start seeing these true custom fire trucks, and then you start complaining about money, it's difficult, right? Because you're spending money, and we had examples of ladder trucks where we wanted to just cut off the corners of the back end of a ladder truck, and it was like $10,000. Well, that's crazy, right? It was, it's partly a safety thing, accident reduction thing. There's a lot of things that went into that, but $10,000, that's a lot of money to spend on that, when that's about what the cost of airbags or, frontal or underside protection or reinforcing the bumper could cost. As much as that is great operationally, maybe that wasn't the safest thing for our people. And so I think that's where it comes back to, is that, as you start going out there and doing crazy things, it's going to cost you money.
You got to understand too that just because, again, that, you take your manufacturer, your vendor or salesman a picture and say, hey, listen, we want this. Okay, well, that's not my fire truck. Well, that's okay. I still want this on your brand of this fire truck. Okay, but we don't do that. And again, that's where it comes into. Just because one manufacturer does it doesn't mean the other one can do the same thing the same way. But whether it's the way they build their body, or again, the capability that they have to build that body, the capability they have to engineer it. So you have to understand that. And if you again, are trying to build, on a budget, custom things go out the window. And again, it comes back to those needs. I need water to come in and out of this many hand lines. I need, it to have the NFPA minimum amount of lights on it. And that's what we're going to bid, because that's what I need and that's what I can afford, versus, well, I would like it to have 5 discharges on it. I would like it to have, lights here, all over the place that aren't necessarily interrupt rails, things like this. We want train horns or a howler or, whatever. Then, you got to understand that. Or we want to do this special, angled corner. Okay, well, it costs money to do all that stuff. Do you really need it? Or would it be nice to have, and do you want it? And then again, does it fit into your budget?
I think, as we come up on the time here, a question that I have in the back of my mind, and, I know we've talked about it. I've talked with Tom Shand, obviously, and others. And, when we were out at FDSOA at that conference, having conversations with other fleet managers and, people on specification committees, it's just very interesting to hear the answer. And I know you have some good thoughts on it. So I want to pose the question to kind of work out some of the thoughts with the listeners as we part this conversation. If I were to offer you a fire engine for $700,000, let's even go lower. Let's say $650,000 and delivery within 8 months. What's your initial thought process? What scares you? What excites you about that? And what would be some hesitations with that kind of availability and price point?
Sure. I mean, the things obviously that excite you are the price point and the time frame that you can have it done, right? The things that start to scare me are obviously the components. What level of protection for corrosion for my personnel does it have? And again, if I'm going to a dry, environment in Arizona, am I concerned with corrosion protection or protection from humidity or salt or things like that? Is that something that I can give up there? Am I okay not having my my pump plumbing painted, because yeah, it's stainless steel, but there are still a lot of other aspects and parts that are galvanized or not truly stainless. And again, being able to inspect something quickly, so when you look at that, what tires are on it, what rims are on it, what brakes are on it, again, are they air brake or are they disc brakes? Are they cam brakes? What is that going to cost me throughout the course of this thing? What type of material are the seats made out of? How is the dash constructed, or the engine tunnel? What type of materials on it? Can I clean it? Is it going to last the 15, 20 years I need it to last? Things like that. What's the pump on it? Does a pump, does a pump capacity meet what I need this pumper to do? Or is it a, decreased lower pump capacity to keep the cost down? What valves are on it? What's the setup? Things like that become really, really important, because again, when you look at cost, sure, it's $600,000 now, but the hose bed's way up here, so that we could get 1,000 gallons of water on it. And then, over the course of the 15 years that I have it, I have 5 guys who have knee injuries that go out and, are now on a disability retirement because of that. Does that, when you look at that grand scheme of things, does it really work? And it might be the perfect pumper for somebody. Again, I think the key is, and it's to not get sucked into, and some people you have to, right? We're just, if you didn't plan to replace apparatus and you had accidents, or your stuff is 35 years old at this point and it's falling apart, you're going to take what you can get. And that's unfortunate, because you're going to try to make it work, and it's not truly going to work for you. And the goal is to build a fire truck that works for you, no matter what the cost of that is. And there's ways to get there. Again, there are ways to get there, right? But, I think those are the big things that scare me. Yeah, I mean, obviously, sure, $650 for a pumper, that's awesome. Is it doable? Yeah, there's still people out there who can, maybe not $650 with a custom cab. You might get close, but you're limited on a lot of things in that. It's bare bones. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that if that's your budget, but you have to continue to think is, what am I going to do on the back end to make sure that this works for me? Again, you're going to increase that vigilance on inspections, getting underneath of it, cleaning it, keeping, rust from starting. And if you see it, how are you going to correct it right away so that, it doesn't continue to build or show a problem? Is a lesser quality material going to rip? Am I going to replace it right away? Things like that. All kinds of little things, that are like that. Again, it's just, you have to answer those questions. Is this worth it right now for me to be able to do it? Does it truly fix my problem, or is it a Band-Aid, on a solution that probably it could never get fixed? If you didn't have a replacement plan when you started, and for 35 years, and now all of a sudden you don't have pumpers at work or ladder trucks are out, the chances are you're going to buy whatever you can right away, and you're probably not going to fix the real problem and develop some sort of plan and determine how much money has to be set aside for you to do that. And even if you do, when you go to your town and say, hey, listen, for the last 35 years, we haven't spent any of your money, but we need to buy a $400,000 used pumper that's 25 years old, but it's the only thing we got that's out there. But then again, in 4 more years, I need $800,000 to $1.5 million for this new pumper. They're going to laugh at you because you didn't do a good job of explaining your needs throughout that process. So I think that's a long ramble on that whole, what would I buy right now if I could? But
no, I think that was good. There's a lot of stuff to kind of consider there. And, I would also kind of caution on that I have a 6-month lead time at, $1.4 million engine, because you're getting charged the cost of what a 4-year engine from now would be charged, what we would charge, I guess, for that type of fire truck, but you're paying those prices today. And, if you have that short lead time fire truck, you really want to ask the question, what did somebody who's getting a fire truck in that same time frame pay when they signed contract? And, is this actually a deal? Is this actually something? And again, if, like you said, if you're searching for that short lead time and you're willing to pay for it, that's fine. But would it actually be cheaper or better if you could go down that option list and wait the time to actually go out and properly spec the fire truck? Can you actually get a better deal? Because again, it's going to last longer. It's going to be more fit to your needs. It's going to be, better for that 30-year actual replacement. And it's going to give you the time to get the funds together that you need to actually fix the problem. And I think without even having a conversation beforehand, you hit a lot of the things that I was thinking on the head there. I mean, that's a Band-Aid to me. When you're buying a stock pumper and, there's a saying, there's no such thing as a deal. And there's a lot of people that thought they were getting deals out there. And, they're in this rural environment getting a 500-gallon tank that a city, on an engine that a city denied the purchase for because it wasn't up to their spec or whatever. You got to start questioning why would I buy that now? Or there's only a 3-year-old engine out there for sale that's, with very low mileage. Why is that unit for sale?
Right. What happened?
What's wrong with it?
Right. Can I see your maintenance records? Things like that. You're sure. And, again, buying a fire truck is just like going to a car dealership and buying a car. There's all different models and makes that fit your needs. Right. Hey, we run 130 calls a year, and again, in a dry environment or, in the middle of the Midwest or somewhere that's dry, that doesn't have, the type of environment we have here. Can we back off some of this stuff? Do I need all this? No, we can buy, the base model of this fire truck and be okay. It's the same thing. Even manufacturers have, you don't think about it, but there's manufacturers that have different models of those fire trucks. And all right, well, in this model, I can get, a 450 horsepower engine with 1,650, foot-pounds of torque. But if I go to the lower model, I can still get the 450, but I can only get 1,250 torque. So, there's things like that. Well, will that lower model really work for me? Because it's going to save me not only time, but money to do it. So again, it's kind of looking at all that stuff, and making sure that works for you and buying the model that you need. And again, and a lot of high end models, there's a lot of nice to haves or wants and not needs,
I compare that to my wife's need for heated seats and a heated steering wheel. The cold weather package doesn't just include the heated seats. There's about 6 other options that you don't have a choice on. And then on top of that, if you want a heated steering wheel, that's another package. The cold weather package doesn't even get both of them. You got to go to a whole nother model. So here I am paying, all this money for stuff that I don't even know the car can do. Right. I think that's probably the funniest thing.
Well, again, it's a want versus a need. Your wife wanted it. You needed it because your wife wanted it. Because you didn't have the ability to tell her to put a hat and gloves on. But it's still, again, that's a need, right? When you sat down and said, hey, listen, we're going to go buy this car. This is what I need. Same thing when I looked at my car, I really wanted cooled seats. I don't really care about the heated ones, although I'm getting older and it actually is nicer. But, again, you said that's a need that we have to have in this car. Same thing, I wanted cool seats, but there's only a certain number of cars that have them. And again, you're paying, a markup for that. So do I really need it? No, it's what I wanted, but it's not what I got. So same thing. It's that want versus need. Your wife needed it. I wanted it. She got what she needed and wanted, and I got what I needed and not really what I wanted, which is fine. It's the same way as building fire trucks. It's building that fire truck to your budget, but I think we can kind of end it here, but I think it's building that fire truck to your budget, but making sure that what you're building fits your needs and that you are building within your budget properly and not adding things that you don't need.
Get the cost for those items, man. Get that breakout of what those items cost. That if it's even on that needs list, right, or that want list, if you're on that really tight budget and you're coming up on that bottom dollar, figure out what you can get later, right? If it's equipment or something else or ladders or, you can buy over that 4-year, 3-year, 2-year lead time and then get those numbers to make that informed decision. What is this worth, that number that it's costing? When you get that number of $1.2 million for an engine, you want to start breaking that down. What does this item cost? Is that a want or a need? And is it worth it for us to pay it? It could be a need that you thought it was, but the cost isn't worth it to be that much of a necessity. I think that's huge. Knowledge is power.
And again, I think just to kind of, just one thing popped in my head a long time ago, but it's like, hey, we're going to put flashlights in here. Okay, are you providing the wiring for it? No, we'll have that done back we'll have that done back, when we get it. Okay, well, it costs them $300 to wire this thing right now. When you go back, and now somebody has to run wire from the battery or however you're going to power it all the way up through, drill holes. Now it's costing you $300 plus the 2 hours of shop labor. So again, it's, I didn't want to get back into it, but that's just, you have to look at everything when you're comparing that cost. Yeah, it would be nice. We're going to do this later, but later is going to cost me 5 times as much to do it now. So let's just do it now. Again, spend the money wisely, spend it when you need to, and think about the whole process through the cost and the life of that fire truck. And that's how you truly decide if what you're going to spend now is in your budget. Your budget can't just be the upfront money. The budget has to be the life cycle of that fire truck, because it's going to continue to cost you money to run everything that you put on it. And if you put all the fancy electrical stuff on it and all of this foam on different caps, things like that, that's a cost that you have to factor into that initial cost and that initial budget. And if you're trying to do something, with a lesser amount of money, then, make sure you're looking at that overall cost and what can I do now that's going to last me this long to fit in that pocket of money.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of good information, and I'll end on a story that heated seat thing is very real. I had my screen break for my car, and the heated seats were tied to that screen. So for every day that was below 40 degrees, the heated seats automatically turned on, and I had no way to turn those seats off. So for about a month and a half, I debated whether it was worth it to buy a new screen as I was driving my hour and a half commute to work, with towels underneath me because my bottom end was sweating because the heated seats wouldn't turn off. So then I spent that $800 to go buy that new screen so I could turn the heated seats off after driving down the road. And that's a true story, right? The want and how it comes back to cost more money later.
Right. And I don't want to keep going. We can end here. We got, let's say 3 minutes till we're an hour and 10 minutes into this. But I think that you brought up a good point there is, and it was on my list of things to do, is if you had bought the extended warranty for that car, that would have been covered, right? But you say, I don't need the extended warranty. But now parts and pieces are so expensive. And I had the same thing. I had a screen go bad. Well, great. It's covered under warranty. Unfortunately for me, they couldn't put it in after I did my 6-hour drive to the beach with no radio, but, and kids screaming in the back of the car. But, either way, it's when you're buying this truck, you don't need to go with a 2-year warranty, but hey, why don't you tell me what the price of that 2-year warranty is? Tell me what the price of a 5-year warranty is. Don't put it in the cost of the fire truck, but give it to me on the end. Maybe it's only an extra $2,000 to go with another year warranty. Is that worth the money up front? Sure. Again, so you have to think about those things as well. And that was one of the things that was on my list is get that big picture. And sometimes spending money up front is better than not spending money, and trying to cover it up down the road. So, I think with the warranty thing, we can probably kind of end it there.
Yeah, we'll talk forever about buying fire trucks, like I said earlier. But there's a lot of information there to digest. I think it was a good conversation, something we might come back to in the future too. But appreciate all you guys and gals listening in today. If you guys have any suggestions, any questions, anything pop into your head from today's podcast, feel free to reach out. Nick, Nick, Wilbur, Wilbur, at evr.solutions. Send us an email, and we can obviously start a new podcast, answer your questions. Like we always say, phone call or an email is free. we don't mind helping out, especially with this, very important purchasing of fire trucks. Have a great day. Be safe out there, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Yep. Thank you all.
In firefighting and public safety, reliability is key. For over 20 years, the Fire Store has equipped first responders with trusted gear featuring brands like MSA Carnes for helmets and Seek for thermal imaging cameras. Stay prepared. Visit thefirestore.com today. The Fire Store, your trusted safety.